I was never really a huge Guns N' Roses fan. Of course, I had the first big album that really hit hard, and I paid attention to them a little bit later. It seems like they were kind of going off the rails towards the end of their popularity in the 80s and 90s. And then they released Spaghetti Incident in 1993. I know some of you are wondering where I'm going with this. After they released Use Your Illusion in 1991, they released the Spaghetti Incident in 1993. Most people didn't really consider that to be much of an album, but then it took them 15 years to put out Chinese Democracy. This is an album that they had been promising, that Axl Rose had been promising forever, and it never materialized, and it got to be kind of a running joke. I kind of finally figured out exactly what Axl was going through, because what you're watching here, if you are watching this video, is my 9th time shooting this video. I just can't seem to get it right. And it kind of makes you appreciate the fact that sometimes when you're trying to make something that's really, really good, you wind up just kind of getting in your own way. So hopefully you are watching this video. Hopefully you appreciate what it takes sometimes to make content for YouTube. It's maybe not quite as easy as some folks think it is. My fellow YouTubers out there know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're watching this video, this is an important video. This is about trying to verify a coin that you have suspicions about, and that's really what we're trying to get at the heart of. I've released a couple of videos recently about counterfeit gold coins. It wasn't really my intention to keep on that path, but something happened to me a couple of days ago, and I thought I'd better go ahead and grab hold of this opportunity, because I really think that this is a very topical, a very important subject, one that's becoming more and more important. And I wanted to arm you guys with as much information as we possibly can. It's my goal, ultimately. The whole reason I do these videos is to inform and also to entertain, but I think you're going to like this one. If you're new to the channel, my name is Dub C. I want to thank you for being with me here today. If this is the first time watching one of my videos, or maybe you've caught a couple of them before, go ahead and click on that subscription button down below the screen that you're watching. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe to the channel. It's just a way to show appreciation for the work that we do. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, you guys know that I genuinely appreciate you being with me here today. It's so amazing to be able to make content and have it seen and appreciated by a large group of people that are as enthusiastic about these items as I am. If you're new to the channel, I begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. And I also like to begin my videos with a concept or two that we can work back into it. Normally, that concept really comes into play with a video. We talk about a very specific topic, and you see how that works back into the subject. In this case, I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce a type of coin, because that's the kind of coin that we're talking about in this video. It's not necessarily related in any other way other than the fact that this is an example of what we're talking about. And what we're talking about is the concept of a trade dollar. What is a trade dollar? It's one of those unusual expressions in numismatics, or frankly anything, that actually means what it says. These are pieces that were made for trade, coins that were made for trade. And you might be thinking, isn't any coin made for trade, Dub C? You're absolutely right. You're taking a coin down to the local coiner shop and spending it. You're trading for it. That's the idea. But in this case, I'm talking about global trade. I'm talking about world trade, transoceanic trade, that kind of thing. There had been coins made in antiquity that were kind of considered the first global currency, but that was really the known world, like areas around the Mediterranean. What we're talking about here is truly global trade, and it all really starts with these pieces. These are Spanish colonial pieces of 8 reales. We've talked about these a lot on my channel. I've got a series on stacking Mexican silver. The very first video in that series is all about these 8 reales, made by Spain in the Spanish colonies of New Spain. So that would be areas of North America, Central America, even South America. These were made all over New Spain, and they were incredibly popular. This became something that was in super high demand literally around the world. So kind of from Spain and Europe all the way across the ocean to the American colonies, and then across the Pacific Ocean to China. So you can see how this truly is global trade for the first time. These Spanish galleons would load up on the Pacific side of what is now kind of Mexico with these silver coins. These silver coins, 27.06 grams of 0.896 pure silver, so really close to 90% silver, like our American silver dollars. There's a reason for that. Our American silver dollars closely mimicked these pieces when we first made them. That equates to 27.06 grams of 0.896 silver, 0.78 of a troy ounce. And these coins would go across the ocean. Sometimes they would stop in the Philippines. Sometimes they would go onto the Chinese mainland and be traded for silk and cloisonne and cinnabar and porcelain, all sorts of trade goods that were in super high demand in Europe and also in kind of a growing American continent. So these pieces back across the ocean, full of these galleons, full of these trade items, overland to the Atlantic Ocean, all the way back to Europe, where they made the people that were able to get their hands on that stuff incredibly rich. And what you're looking at here is little punches all over the surface of those coins, of this coin. And that's how we know that this coin actually did participate in that Manila trade, because these are what we call chop marks. They merchants in China tested a lot of these pieces that came into their hands to see if they were authentic, to test that silver quality. And they used punches, we call those chops, and literally hammered them into the surface of the coin. That's a chop mark, and chop mark coins have become an entirely different area segment of collecting. When Spain finally ceded control to Mexico, Mexico started making their own silver 8 reales. This trade with China was still incredibly important, and I think that a lot of countries still wanted to get their hands on Mexican silver. After all, these pieces were made in the same mints often that the Spanish colonial pieces had been made. This is an example of a Mexican Republic 8 real. You see that it says 8R right there. That's the Zacatecas mint mark. This is an 1885 8 real piece. And these were also popular in China. China still wanted the silver even after Mexico ceded control. So these pieces continued to be made in large quantity and shipped overseas. These pieces, 27.07 grams of 0.903 pure silver, so their actual silver weight, 0.78 of a troy ounce. That's not really that surprising, right? Made in the same mint by the same type and quality of silver, so they were essentially the same purity, the same weight and everything else as the Spanish colonial pieces. But Mexico and Spain weren't the only people who were trying to get on board with this Asian trade. They would have called it the Orient trade or Chinese trade. Places like Vietnam, places like Japan had their own trade dollars. France had their own trade dollars. The UK had their own trade dollars. And the United States of America produced their own trade dollars. These were kind of unknown and unloved in the numismatic field going back about 100 years ago, all the way up until about 40 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, and then they slowly started taking off. This is an example from 1876, designed specifically for trade in Asia. You can see down at the bottom, it actually literally says trade dollar, right? And then it says 420 grains of 900 fine silver. So they were telling those Chinese merchants exactly how much silver was in these pieces. We do often find these pieces with chop marks too, so we know that they made it to the Chinese mainland and those Chinese merchants were after them. U.S. trade dollar, 27.22 grams of 900 silver. Actual silver weight, take a guess, 0.78 of a troy ounce. You're starting to see a theme here, right? I mentioned that the UK was also involved in this trade, so much so that the UK fought wars with China for the right to be able to buy and sell goods within their own country. It's kind of a strange thing when you think about it. In the Second Opium War, I believe, Great Britain actually won the port city of Hong Kong, and it remained a British possession all the way up until 1997, right? All the way through the Communist Revolution and everything else, it was still considered part of England, part of Great Britain. So they made their own, Great Britain made their own trade dollars, and this is kind of an interesting thing. This is Britannia standing there with a ship in the background. You can see this trident in her hand. Britannia rules the waves, right? And it actually says $1 right there, an unusual denomination for the UK. The backs of these are just really interesting and exotic looking. That is such a beautiful design, made for trade in Asia. And the thing about these is that while some of them were made at the London Mint, many of these were actually struck overseas. These were struck in Kolkata and Bombay, what we call Calcutta, or what we actually called Calcutta, what they called Calcutta, and struck in Bombay, that's what we call Mumbai now. So these were struck in India as well as being struck in London. Interesting, struck in a UK possession to be traded in China with other UK possessions. It was really truly a global system. You can see that now. British trade dollar, 26.95 grams of 900 silver. Anyone? Actual silver weight of 0.78 of a troy ounce. The Chinese merchants wanted silver. They wanted silver in these kinds of quantities and this kind of purity. And what the Chinese merchants wanted back then, the Chinese merchants were getting. Interesting to note that these pieces had chop marks in them also, and this is an example of very hard to see one right there, but you see it right there on Britannia's shield. She's got a little punch mark right there. That is a chop mark. Chinese merchants were concerned about counterfeits. They were concerned about authenticity going back hundreds of years. If that's not foreshadowing, I'm not sure what is. So interesting, that's what a trade dollar is. And a couple days ago, I was in one of my local shops, and they had just taken in a couple milk crates of silver of various shapes and sizes. And I love that when that comes into the shop, to be able to look through a collection and find some interesting pieces. Unfortunately, this time, I wasn't the first person in the door, and there was a customer who had kind of gone through it and picked out some, what I have to admit, were some pretty interesting pieces. Among them was this piece. This is a British trade dollar. And we don't see those very often in my part of the country. I use the expression that these are unusual but familiar. I'll come back to that a little bit later in this video. So I asked if it would be okay if I kind of looked through the pieces that they had set aside, and they were fine with me doing that. My dealer was fine with me doing that. And I picked this up and I was thinking about it in terms of things like heft. You know, I am a skeptic by nature. I've always been very skeptical. And it served me well. So the first thing I did was realize that this is a piece that circulated in and around China. And that kind of automatically puts you in a mood. I don't want to use red flags and yellow flags. I do that sometimes in my videos. Let's talk about fire alarms. That should set off a little bit of a smoke detector, right? That anytime you're looking at something that was widely circulated in and around China, and it's an unfortunate truth of our hobby that Chinese counterfeiters have made probably millions and millions of fake pieces over the last 20 years. So anytime that I'm seeing something that circulated in China and around China, because those are the pieces that they seem to counterfeit the most, right? It's the Fat Man dollars, the Young Shikai dollars, the junk dollars. Sometimes it's Morgan dollars and Silver Eagles and things like that. But when it comes to numismatic pieces, it seems to be the pieces that actually circulated there. I think that they were familiar with these pieces, and that's kind of what they went for first. Interesting. So nothing was really setting off the smoke detectors, but there was a little whiff of smoke there. It's a beautiful coin. That's a nice amount of luster that we have left on this piece. It's in a nice PCGS slab. Something about it was making me kind of look very carefully at this, and maybe it's just not skepticism, right? So I'm taking my loupe and I'm looking very carefully, and I noticed that some of the detail is a little bit weakly struck. Not a detector going off, but again, a little bit whiff of smoke. And I also noticed that in some of the fields, there were a little bit of irregularities. Now, if you saw that video that I shot on the British sovereign counterfeits, you know that those irregularities in the fields are a big red flag. Let's go back to flags there for the British sovereign. The UK Mint did not release things that weren't perfect. Their designs were incredibly detailed and very crisply struck. They did that to try to keep counterfeiters from counterfeiting their pieces. But what I did is I chalked that up to the fact that, like I said, these pieces were struck in Bombay and Calcutta. And if the dies were being shipped from London, it stands to reason that those dies going to a tropical climate across the ocean may have picked up a little bit of dye rust, a little bit of pitting. And that pitting and dye rust actually makes its way onto the coins, not that rust itself, but those indentations and the unevenness in the fields. We actually see that in the Morgan dollar series. There are certain Morgan dollars that have a little bit of pitting showing up and dye rust, and it just makes kind of the opposite on the coins when you strike them. So I thought that that was probably what this was. This piece, a Bombay, India mint mark. So it kind of made sense, and I realized that I was already starting to believe what I was being told to believe here. when you're looking at something that is counterfeited, and I'll kind of go over the list of how I see modern counterfeiters operating, you start to realize that they are masters at using psychological theory, right? They may not know what this is in a fancy textbook. I studied psychology in college. They may not have gone to college and studied psychology, but they know what they're doing when it comes to using psychology against us. And I'll talk a little bit about perceptual fill a little bit later. It's one of my favorite examples. Already I'm starting to make excuses for something that I should be putting up those smoke alarms about. This piece didn't look quite right, but I dismissed why it didn't look right. But I wanted to continue to looking at it. At least I have that skepticism, and I hope that you always keep that skepticism with you too. So I was looking at it, something didn't seem quite right. I chalked part of it up to the fact that this is a brand new PCGS slab. You can see the little inlaid PCGS right there. I don't have a lot of experience with modern PCGS slabs. If you've seen my videos before, you know that I collect vintage slabs. That's really how I add a little bit of interest to my collection. This is a brand new PCGS slab, and I've only got a little bit of experience with those. Again, a little bit unusual, but familiar. I think we'll keep on coming back to that theme in this video. Something about it didn't seem quite right, but I was chalking it up to the fact that it's a brand new slab. In any event, I asked my dealer if they could go ahead and put it onto their Sigma. They actually have several different Sigmas in their shop. I just wanted to kind of check for my own interest, and they agreed. So I'll kind of run over what we did here. Now, I've talked about the Sigma a lot on this channel. The Sigma is not an XRF. It doesn't work like you can put something on it and it will tell you, well, that's 88.7% silver with a balance of copper. That's the way an XRF works. But the Sigma actually has presets that you have to use. You set a preset, and then it compares the coin that you place on top of it and either agrees or disagrees that it's within that preset. So in this case, I'll show you an example. We're going to move this down from gold down to silver, and we're going to go across to 92.5% sterling. That's what these pieces are supposed to be. 92.5 sterling is the silver standard that was used in the UK. That's where the word sterling comes from. So we'll go ahead and we'll set it for 92.5 sterling, and we'll try it with these raw examples. I'm 95% sure that these are good quality examples. Let's just see how they read. So you have a cursor, actually you've got these brackets here, and then you've got the little black box. We call that a cursor. That black box, that cursor is supposed to be within the brackets if the piece, if the Sigma agrees with your evaluation, if it says that yes, this is 92.5. But it's not definitive. In this case, these are at least 100 years old, and the Sigma only has one setting for sterling silver. It does have different settings for other alloys of silver. We'll take a look at one of those in just a moment. The fact that the cursor is just outside of the brackets isn't definitive. It doesn't tell us that this is a fake or anything. It just says it's having a little bit of an issue with it. Remember that smoke that we're smelling got a little bit thicker maybe. Let's take a look at this piece. This piece is even a little bit more corroded, and I'm still sure that this is an authentic piece, but that corrosion, that darkness, whatever it is, may interfere at least a little bit. Let's try that. Well, the cursor is just a tiny little bit further outside of the brackets. Again, it's not telling us a definite no, but it's saying take a closer look at this piece, and that's kind of the vibe that I was feeling about the piece that's in this lab anyway. So let's try that piece and see what it says. Well, you can probably see there's a small arrow there that's pointing off to the right. That means that something is definitely wrong. So maybe we're starting to hear that beep on that smoke detector down in the basement. Time to change the batteries or something, right? You can flip these pieces over and see if it gives you a different read. Not quite where we want it to be, right? That arrow is pointing off, which means that cursor is nowhere to be seen. That's a pretty strong beeping sound from that smoke detector. But this is a piece in a slab, and slabs can interfere with the Sigma's ability to read things. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So in this case, what I've done, or what we did at the shop, and what I've done in the past, is we actually bump it down. Let's go to 90%. And I said before that there were three settings for some of the other alloys. 90% is one of them. It says 90% US pre-1900. We also have 90% US pre-1945. And then the final one is 90% coin 1960. You see that? You try to get the closest to the date of your piece. There were different alloys used as 90%, and Sigma recognizes that sometimes they need to be a little bit more precise. So we're going to go back to the oldest setting. That's pre-1900, because this is 1911. That's what this is supposed to be. So we'll try it there at 90%. And my thought process is, if it reads okay at 90%, but maybe not quite at 92.5, that is still probably a good quality coin. It's just maybe the alloy was off. Maybe the Sigma's ability to read that alloy is a little bit off. Something is a little bit strange. The slab got in the way. Remember, these pieces were struck a long time ago overseas. Well, our cursor has reappeared. That's a good sign. It's outside of the bracket still, but again, this isn't supposed to be 90%. It's supposed to be 92.5. So what this is telling us, and we'll go ahead and flip it over and see if we stay exact same place. What this is telling me, at least to my eyes, is that the Sigma is not being definitive. If you've ever thought that the Sigma would solve all of your problems, I think this illustrates that it's a great set of eyes, but it's not telling us definitively one way or another if this is a good piece or a bad piece. It's maybe making that smoke detector beep a little bit faster. That's one of the drawbacks of the Sigma. It is not as definitive as some folks who don't use them often might think that it is. In this case, I think it says that this warrants further investigation, and that's the way I've always used my Sigma. If it's telling me absolutely positively spot on, my confidence goes up in a piece being authentic. But if it's a little bit iffy, then maybe it just requires a little bit of extra digging in to see what we can find. And if it's crazy off, that's a great indication that the piece is not authentic. In this case, I think it was a little bit iffy, so let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into it. By this time, the guy who had set this aside, bless his heart, had decided that maybe this wasn't the right piece for him. I don't really blame him, and my dealer didn't blame me either. We were looking at this piece trying to get as much information about it as we possibly could. But at that point, the dealer just suggested that I take this home with me and do a little bit of a deeper dive into it. So I graciously agreed, because always be learning, right? I wanted to kind of see what I can find out about this piece. I mentioned before that there was psychology involved here, and I mentioned briefly the perceptual fill. That's one of the cognitive techniques that we can use to kind of show how sometimes we see with our brain rather than seeing with our eyes. Humans are really good at completing images where there is something missing. In that case, I think this really starts to show its head in this piece in particular. I'll give you an example. This is a pretty famous picture of perceptual fill. What are you looking at here? Go ahead and shout it as loud as you can. Make your spouse or your kids freak out. You're seeing probably 4 blue circles with a white square laid on top of them, right? That's actually not what you're seeing. That's what your brain is telling you your eyes are seeing. Look at the same image, but with those circles oriented slightly differently. The square disappears because it was never there, and the circles aren't complete circles, even though they kind of looked like they were complete circles in the earlier image. They're just 3/4 circles, or whatever you want that fraction to be. Your brain filled in the rest of the information and completed that square where there was not a square there before. And that's the problem when you have something that is suspect, whether it's a coin or anything else, especially when you can't compare that piece to an authentic piece. And I think that that's really one of the main things that we need to think about here. In this case, the coin that was in my dealer shop, this 1911B Great Britain trade dollar, was the only example, and I would hazard to guess it was probably the only example of this coin within a 50-mile radius. We just don't see those very often around here. My dealer didn't have 3 or 4 other examples in their case, and then another 5 or 6 examples raw like these pieces here. This is just not something that walks into the shop very often. I mentioned before that concept of unusual but familiar. Let's take a look at that. What does the modern counterfeiter do? What do they like to do? What is their target? And maybe what should you be looking for? I think we have this romantic notion that counterfeiters in the past would have gone after these really high dollar items. We've seen movies like the Thomas Crown incident where somebody makes a counterfeit painting and it sells for $50 million or $100 million. The problem with that, especially when you're talking about coins, is that there are really good experts out there who are familiar with the really rare coins. If somebody is collecting these pieces, they know a lot about them. The certification services know a lot about them, and they're not likely to let something that is a super valuable counterfeit slip into their midst. It's just not going to happen very often. So what do they go for? I think they go for kind of a middle-of-the-road range on a lot of different things. I think it would be the smart, modern counterfeiter's ideal thing to do. And let me just kind of explain where I'm going with that. If you're making a coin, a counterfeit coin that is a really high grade, you're going to have experts who are going to be able to pick that out, right? It's not going to blend in with the rest of the crowd. If you're making a coin that is really valuable, those are the kinds of pieces that the experts focus on. So that's not going to stick out, or it is going to stick out rather. If you're looking at pieces that are really rare, something that doesn't come up very often for sale, those pieces we kind of know about, right? There are examples that actually have names and designations. We can pick them out and say, oh, that's Norweb collection, or that's the Counterfeit dollar, or something like that. So I think they would look for kind of a middle of the road in terms of populations. Now, fortunately for third-party graders like PCGS, and I'll refer to their website quite a bit in this channel, or this video, they actually have populations. And populations are just the reports of the number of pieces of that specific coin and that specific grade that they have graded to date. CAC and NGC do the same thing, and it's a really nice feature. In this case, you're looking at the population report of the 1911B British trade dollar. You can see there. And according to the estimates or the figures that I'm looking at right now, they have graded approximately 367 AU58s. That's the grade on this coin. With 942 higher graded examples, there's no real such thing as a 59, so those would be 60 or uncirculated and above. So a total of, what's that, somewhere around 1,400 pieces. Scarce, but not rare. I think that's a good explanation of those numbers. You can look up pretty much any coin and see how many pieces they have graded. That's a great way to find out if something really is valuable and rare. Keep that trick in your back of your mind also. This is something that you have access to anytime you want to look up something on PCGS or NGC's website. So we've ticked off a couple of boxes that I think the modern counterfeiter would be going for. Scarce but not rare, middle of the grade range in terms of grade, middle of the road in terms of dollar value, and something that is familiar but unusual. All of that gives them kind of ground cover so they can operate without being seen very well. I mentioned grade in particular. A counterfeiter can make an MS65 example of a coin, but we coin collectors can usually pick that out pretty well. A 65 has to be really precise. And they probably wouldn't make something that was a lower grade either. We saw kind of a rash of counterfeit Roman coins in the 1970s. I think they were probably brought back as tourist pieces. But the counterfeiters, if they were really truly counterfeiting, they were just making a souvenir probably. These pieces had intentionally been made in a worn condition, almost like pre-worn condition, so I guess they would seem more authentic, but we could kind of pick that out. We know when something has been made to look like it has age. It doesn't look quite right. And also if they tried to mechanically alter it and like wear it down, we can definitely pick that out. So I think that the idea of counterfeiters trying to make something that is intentionally a super high grade or a super low grade would be problematic for them. If they make something that's a little bit more middle of the road, there's a lot more leniency, right? If you took 10 different coins that were all graded AU58, they would all have different bumps and dings and marks and a little bit of different wear pattern here and there, slightly different tone. So again, that's giving them that ground cover. Something doesn't have to be exactly one way or exactly the other. It can be kind of a broad spectrum, and I think that's ultimately what they're looking for. Middle of the road grade, middle of the road condition, middle of the road pricing. And if you were to take something and add it to a counterfeit slab, then I think that perceptual fill is really starting to affect people. I think that you can really get somebody thinking that a piece is authentic when it's not. So with that in mind, I started looking at this coin, and the very first thing I did, after I had already used my skepticism and my loop to take a close look at it, those things that you always have with you, always use those things and keep on trying to sharpen those tools if you can. This number right here is the certification number, that / and it says 4378, that number. That's the certification of this exact coin. Every time you send a coin to a third-party grader, it gets a certification number, and it doesn't represent the coin in general. It means this one right here, that coin, exact coin, has that unique certification number. And if you drop that certification number into the website, I'll show you what it looks like on PCGS's website. it will pull up information about this exact coin. That's your first line of defense when you want to check something to see if it's authentic. If that information comes up, you've crossed a pretty big bridge. If that information didn't come up, that means the certification number is potentially inauthentic, and then you've got a big beeping alarm down in that basement. In this case, it brought up this coin. And what was really neat about it is it brings up all the information about the coin. So it tells you that it is a trade dollar from Great Britain, a 1911 B, a Gold Shield PCGS, a graded PCGS AU58. It even tells us the Pridemore number. What's the Pridemore number? Fred Pridemore, British numismatist, I think, who cataloged the different varieties of British coins, kind of like a VAM. In this case, I think 21 just means the run-of-the-mill, the garden variety version of the 1911 or the trade dollar, the standard version, if you will. All of that information appears on PCGS's website about this exact coin, and all of it matches the slab. End of story, right? We're done. That's it. Perceptual fill. You see all of this information, your brain starts to play tricks on you and says, don't worry about it. This is a PCGS slab. All of the information about the coin checks out. This piece is good. Something was still bugging me about this piece. So I kept on digging a little bit deeper. Now, there were problems with the color. There was problems with the strike. Remember I said that there were some issues in the field that I had kind of dismissed as maybe dye rust, that kind of thing. But I kept on looking at this piece and trying to get my head wrapped around it to make sure it was authentic. One of the coolest techniques that I use, and if you've been doing this for a while, you may do the same thing, is what I like to call birthmarks. You might know that I put out a series of videos, a two-part video series in the 1901 Pan American Medals of McNeil. And in that case, I was trying to dig up all the examples of this medal that we know to exist. And one way that you do that, especially when you're looking at older catalogs compared to newer catalogs or online auctions, you start to look for those really specific defining characteristics of that one coin, and then you compare it to the pictures in the catalog. Birthmarks. It could be part of a thumbprint across part of the coin. It could be a little dark carbon spot exactly at 2 o'clock on the obverse. A little bit of rainbow toning against the rim. There may be a rim nick right there or right here. There may be a contact or a bag mark. And if you've ever seen those like detective shows on TV where they take a perpetrator's fingerprint and they put it into their fancy database system, and then they bring those two images together, and if they cross over exactly, and they usually show 5 or 6 data points that match, then you know that that's the right person. You got your man. It's kind of the same thing. You look for those things on the coin, and then you compare it to the coin that's in the magazine, the brochure, the catalog, or the website. And once you start to match those pieces together, then you know you've got the right piece. It's tricky when you first start doing this. This can be a really tough thing to do. You have to know what to look for to compare it to, and you start grabbing at straws. But over time, you get pretty good at it. And in this case, I was looking at this piece very closely, and maybe that was one of the other beeping that I heard in the background, was that this is supposed to be an AU58. That's not a super high grade coin. Remember we said middle of the range, middle of the road? But there just weren't very marks anywhere on it that I could use as a birthmark for comparing to the picture that was on PCGS's website. Beautiful full color image. I've been friends with one of the PCGS photographers for many years. He's a great guy and a fantastic photographer. Eventually, this little dot there, incidentally, is on the slab itself. I noticed a tiny little mark here in the field. I'm not talking about that dot there. That's part of the design. You see the corresponding dot then on the other side. One little dot right there in the field, a little bit of a contact mark. And I looked on the picture on PCGS's website. You're seeing an example of that picture here. And I could just barely replicate it. There was something, almost a ghost off in the field, but that was really the only birthmark that I was able to find. Unusual. That's a little bit unusual. I'm pretty good at looking for birthmarks, and I just wasn't finding anything, and that's a little bit strange on a 58. If it was a 67 coin, maybe it would make sense, but 58's seen a little bit of circulation. It's seen a little bit of wear. There should have been a few things that were things that I could look at. Contact marks, bag marks, stains, something. So I did something I don't often do, and I decided to reverse that, to flip the script and actually look at the coin on PCGS's website first, and then compare it to the piece that was in my hand. And it took me a while, and sometimes these contact marks, these back marks, the stains, or whatever it is you're looking for, work into the design elements of the coin, and it can be really frustrating. You're trying to find these, and they're hidden so well. I think that's obviously why some of these designs are that intricate in the first place. They wanted to hide those bag marks and contact marks, make the piece look nicer for a longer period of time. But eventually I realized it was staring me right in the face. If you look at the coin on PCGS's website, you'll notice that there is what looks almost like a double contact mark on Britannia's hip. When these coins first come off of the minting press, they are really crisply struck most of the time. And these edges here in particular, not talking about the flat rim, I'm talking about the very edge here, can be as sharp as a knife sometimes. And they go off on a conveyor belt where they fall into a bin or a canvas sack and they slam against each other, or maybe they're loaded into those canvas sacks, put into a crate and shipped overseas. Those contact marks are when the coins bang against each other. And if you've got a Morgan dollar that's got what looks like an M or a W somewhere in the fields or across Liberty's face, that's what that is. It's the edge of the coin, sometimes with a little bit of those reeds. And that from the edge looks a little bit like an M or a W. Maybe I've just answered that question that you've always had about your Morgan dollar. Why does it have an M in the distance somewhere? Contact mark, bag mark. There were what looked like a double bag mark. You're looking at the image here on the coin on PCGS's website. I was having a really hard time replicating that bag mark on the coin in my slab here. Now, I looked really carefully, and unfortunately there are a few scuffs right across the surface of the slab that may have been obscuring that a little bit. And what I said before is when you don't have an example to compare an authentic piece to versus a piece that's questionable, when you don't have that to look at, that is really tricky. Your brain uses that filling in technique to kind of complete the picture, even though it may not be there. So in this case, even though there was a little bit of scuff over it, I took a high resolution image and I compared the two. And when you see them compared side by side, something definitely looks off. I think we just heard our first real one alarm fire on this coin. Something was not quite right. I mentioned before that this slab, if you enter this information, it takes you directly to PCGS's website about this exact coin, and that's where I was getting all of this information, including that high-resolution image from. One of the nice things about these PCGS slabs is it's got this QR code, and if you were to take your phone and zoom in on this QR code, it will take you to the exact same page, so you can find this information very quickly if you're looking for it in a coin shop or a flea market or a gun show or wherever it is that you're finding these pieces. It'll take you right to it. That alone is a pretty good indication that this piece is authentic. Or is it? We just used that psychological fill, right? Our brain was telling us it's fine, you're fine, it's great. It took you right to the page where it shows all of the information. The QR code on the slab itself took you right there. That hip was a big beeping sound of that smoke detector, right? We put in fresh batteries and it was still starting to blare off. Something is definitely afoot. I know a little bit about these British trade dollars. I've got a really nice example of one in my permanent coin collection. I know, guys, I've been promising that I was going to bring out the coins from that coin collection eventually. I will, I promise. I just so happen to have a really nice example of a British trade dollar in my permanent coin collection. And I know a little bit about them. Remember, I used that expression, unusual but familiar. I think the bad guys are using that also. But I happen to know maybe a little bit more about these than some people do. And one of the cool things about the pieces that were struck in, the ones that are struck in London don't have a mint mark. Mint mark is just usually a small letter that indicates in which city a piece was made. The pieces that were struck in Calcutta have a tiny C next to Britannia's foot down at the bottom of the coin. But the pieces that were struck in Bombay have an interesting mint mark in a kind of a fun location that we just don't see very often in numismatics. Do you know where it is? It's kind of neat. I mentioned before that this is Britannia and that she's got a great big trident. You're looking at the trident right here. That's that big three-pronged fork tool that she's got there. The mint mark for Bombay, India is a really tiny, crisply struck capital B in the middle prong of that trident. And you're seeing a picture of it here on the coin on PCGS's website. It's kind of a fun placement. That is just not something you usually see kind of incorporated into a design very often. I think it's kind of a neat thing, something that I remembered going back many years. It may be the kind of thing that a counterfeiter doesn't know, right? If they didn't really study these coins, they may not know something about that. So I took a look at the picture of the coin on PCGS's website, and I compared it to the piece in the slab in my hand. And once again, if you're looking at the coin by itself, if you've only got the one example, your brain is doing that filling in. It's trying to convince you that this is an authentic piece. But when you've got the authentic piece that you can compare it to, that comparison is night and day. So let's actually take a look at the coin in my hand first, then we'll take a look at the piece that's on PCGS's website, the picture. And then finally, if we compare the two of them like we did with the pictures of Britannia's hip, you see that there is no B on the trident in the slab in my hand. Maybe it's the result of the slab having a scratch against it, but if you're looking really carefully at the prongs on that trident, you see the picture of the coin on PCGS's website there on the left. It's a lot sharper struck, right? You've got some really nice crisp detail to the prongs of that trident. Now compare it to the picture on the right. That's the slab in my hand. It's mushy, right? That was the term that I used when looking at those British sovereigns, when they have kind of a mushy strike. When Britain didn't make mushy, they made crisp and precise. That's a great tell that something is off. We just went up to a 3-alarm fire now. Something is definitely not working right. But like I said, with those detective shows, when you had those images of the fingerprint and the database coming together, I wanted to have at least 3 really strong data points that would prove that this piece is not what it's supposed to be. So looking really closely at the piece that was in my hand wasn't giving me that information. And this goes back to that perceptual fill also. When you're looking at the coin in your hand, you don't know what the right thing is to look for. You don't know that it's supposed to look like this. If it looks like that, and that looks fine to your brain. But when you compare the good known piece to the piece that's questionable, in this case I finally settled on the waves beneath the ship that's way off in the distance next to Britannia's foot. Remember, these are trade dollars, right? That's an image of global trade. Look at the waves beneath the ship on the coin in my hand. They look like water, right? That looks like a ship sailing on water. The ship is a great cue. It's that perceptual fill. Your brain thinks ship. Your brain thinks ship needs to be on water. The devices beneath the ship are supposed to be water. End of story. But look at the waves on the coin on PCGS's website. You can see just how much more crisp and wave-like they look. If you didn't have the example from PCGS, you wouldn't know what those waves are supposed to look like. But when you compare them, they are nothing alike. So that's ultimately what the conclusion of this coin is. This coin is a fake coin in a fake PCGS slab, and that's really devious. Now, if you're the kind of person that deals in PCGS slabs on a regular basis, something may have struck you about this piece automatically. And again, that kind of hit me too. But remember, if you're kind of new to this, you wouldn't have that to go on. And I think that's why I wanted to go through this point by point to show you the diagnostics that I use to determine that this piece is simply not authentic. The QR code takes you right to the right coin. What does that tell you? I think it tells me that the counterfeiters went to PCGS's website and picked out a coin that answered all of those questions, that checked all of those boxes that we talked about earlier. It is a middle-of-the-road grade, a middle-of-the-road scarcity, a middle-of-the-road dollar value, and it's unfamiliar, or it's familiar but unusual. All of those things were exactly what these counterfeiters were looking for, and they even picked the exact coin to go to when they made their fake QR code on the back of the slab, so that you would go there and your brain would be tricked into thinking that this con was accurate. Devious. The PCGS doesn't show the slab on their website, and I think that there's a reason they do that, right? If you knew what the slab was supposed to look like, then the counterfeiters could have faked the slab also and made a pretty decent version of it. If this one has any kind of a question to it, they could have easily copied exactly what they were supposed to for the slab and made it even harder to find. So I think PCGS probably holds back the pictures of the slab itself intentionally. They've got high resolution images of the coin, but not of the slab. I think that's interesting. And then finally, one other thing that I wanted to mention, and maybe some of you folks who are a little bit more familiar with it than I am have already picked this out, But there is something about this slab that maybe I should have known, and I kind of have a little bit of familiarity with it, but it's a technique that PCGS started using about 3 or 4 years ago. It's called near-field communications. The tricky part about this, and I'll talk about near-field communications, is this slab is supposed to be an NFC slab, but it doesn't say that it's an NFC anywhere on it. And I think the counterfeiters knew that. They knew that if they tried to incorporate that technology into it, then you would find out pretty quickly that this is not what it's supposed to be. And I think that's one of the holes of NFC technology. What is NFC? Near field communications is a little tiny computer chip that the slabbing companies can put under the label on the coin on the slab. And it's a really interesting idea. You can take your phone, and sometimes you have to have an app for it. Sometimes modern phones already have this technology built in. You simply put your phone up against it. Your phone will detect that there is an NFC chip right there, and it will automatically either ask you if it's okay to open up a website, or sometimes it just pulls it up automatically and will show you that, hey, that is a near-field communication chips, and it's telling us that this is an authentic PCGS graded British trade dollar or British trade dollar. So it's a really interesting piece of technology. You can see that the QR code will take you to a page, and that might fool you, but the NFC chip will tell you that that coin in particular is authentic. It's interesting technology. I think it's really interesting. This is the only example of a PCGS slab that has that technology embedded in it. And you can see this is just a standard gold shield PCGS slab, PCGS raised letters there. You see that image right there? It almost looks like a mouse radiating messages. That is an indication that this is an NFC slab. We turn it over and we can see the NFC device there too. There's no information about it, right? It doesn't tell you what it is. But if you were to take your cell phone and lay it against this, it would give you a pop-up screen that says that this is an authentic PCGS coin. It's great technology. I think it's really got some interesting potential. Would that have helped us with this coin? I don't think it would have. In fact, the only way that I even know that this is supposed to be an NFC coin is because the information contained on PCGS's website, including that QR code, indicates, and I'll show you where on the page, it indicates that this is supposed to be an NFC slab. But if you didn't know that that was supposed to be an NFC slab, if you didn't go to PCGS's website, you would never have the idea that that is an enabled piece, that it has that NFC chip. I did a 2-part video about counterfeit, about gold bars, actually, and why I don't like gold bars, especially those gold bars that are sealed within assay cards, those little plastic sheets that some gold bars come in. And it's because I think a lot of people are going for this new technology that you can scan those with a phone and it will tell you that this is a good piece. And you put your faith into it, that psychological fill, right? You start believing that. The problem is that that app on your phone proves that the assay card is authentic, but it doesn't say anything about the gold contained inside the assay card. And I think that's the biggest failing of those types of assay cards. We wind up looking at them, and if they look authentic and if they work right in the right app, we start thinking that that means the gold is authentic, and that's not the case. Just because a little piece of paper inside of a sealed piece of plastic says that it's authentic doesn't mean anything about the gold contained inside. And we have that same problem with a modern slab. As we've seen here, this is a pretty good quality fake PCGS slab, and it would have fooled a lot of people. You have that con in your head that if it's in a PCGS slab, it's probably okay. And then if you are using the QR code on the back, that's using your own imagination against you, right? And finally, if you have a technology that you can use on your phone, if these counterfeiters are smart enough to use all of those boxes that we checked off earlier to make a piece that's going to fool a lot of people, if they're sophisticated enough to use maybe 3D printing to make a good quality die to strike counterfeit pieces, maybe even of some kind of a silver alloy. Remember that Sigma was telling us something was okay-ish about that? If they're sophisticated enough to make a fake PCGS slab that's got the PCGS emblem raised here and has the QR code on the back and everything else, what's to stop them from making a fake NFC chip and putting it inside the slab? And boy, if you had a fake NFC chip, and I don't know the technology, maybe it's not a possible thing to do, but counterfeiters are awfully devious people. If they were able to duplicate that technology, even if they pull it out of a real coin and then make duplicates and put them into 100 fake coins of that same thing, they're going to be fooling a lot of people, especially people who think that they're experts. It's an interesting technology, but I think it's got some shortcomings that I really think we should be cautious about. Authenticate the coin inside. Don't worry so much about the slab. So I've got some conclusions here, some ideas on how to protect yourself. Maybe kind of know what you're supposed to be looking for in the first place. I know it's fun to pick out those exotic and interesting pieces that you've always wanted to have in your collection. Just do a little bit of research first. If I hadn't had some familiarity with this British trade dollar, my brain would have filled in all the different dots that were being provided to me by the counterfeiters, and I probably would have believed that this is an authentic piece. So do a little bit of research first before you buy something like this. Buy certified pieces from PCGS, NGC, and CAC. You can set your own dollar amount. I don't want to buy a coin that is greater than $50 or $100 or $500 unless it's in one of those slabs. But stick to that once you've got that idea. And you might be saying, WC, this is a fake coin and a fake slab. How did that protect me? Remember, I wouldn't have known with 100% positivity that this was a fake unless I'd had access to that information on PCGS's website. If this had been a raw piece, I don't know that I would have been able to detect it. It was only by using the information provided by one of the reputable third-party graders that I was able to determine that this piece is not authentic. So if it cost you an extra 30 or 40 or 50 bucks, I think it's probably worth it, right? Your peace of mind is probably worth it. What else? Try to buy from a knowledgeable dealer if you can. If you're looking for that one interesting piece to complete your collection, see if there is a dealer who specializes that. We've got lots of specialists in this country who specialize in a very short range of pieces. See if you can find a piece from them. Their knowledge and expertise is going to have weeded out these kinds of questionable pieces long before you ever see them. And there's value to that. There's no way that my local dealer would have known about this. There's no way that most people would know about this. Who is an expert in British trade dollars of the earlier 20th century, right? I'm sure there's some dealers out there who know about these, but this is the kind of thing that is unusual but familiar. It would fool a lot of people, and I'm not saying that my dealer is not a great dealer. They know their stuff, and they didn't take a super good look at this before I got there. Go with a knowledgeable dealer if you possibly can, and if you can't, go with a dealer who stands behind their merchandise. There are some dealers out there who, once you have walked out the door, they don't want to hear from you ever again. They've got your money and that's the end of the story. Fortunately, my local dealers, and this dealer in particular, is really good, and they really stand behind their merchandise. If I had purchased this from them, taken it home and done this evaluation and realized that this was a counterfeit, no doubt in my mind they would have reimbursed me 100% with an apology, right? That's the kind of dealer you want to make a really good connection with. That's the kind of dealer that you want to have selling you pieces. You want them to stand behind their merchandise. Don't assume that a slab coin means that you're safe. We've just shown that, right? It's easy to believe that. It's easy to look at the QR code, take you right to the right page, check off all the boxes. This is what it's supposed to be. Nope. We've got a 5-alarm fire, and we've got fire trucks parked in the driveway now, banging on the door. We know that this piece is a fake. Verify with the certification lookups. Like I said, go to the websites, take a look at this information very, very carefully, and make sure that everything matches the way that it's supposed to. And then finally, be suspicious, right? Use that skepticism that's inside all of us. Don't be a jerk about it. I don't want you to be a jerk and come off like a jerk, but use your skepticism. Doubt these things until you know for certain that they are what they're supposed to be. An inauthentic coin in an inauthentic slab, that would have fooled a lot of people. But you were able to see the tools that I used to diagnose this, including the Sigma is an important tool, but maybe didn't give us the full answer. If you've got questions about any of the things that we talked about here today, by all means leave a question down below. This is, again, one of those videos where I'd like to encourage everybody to look through the comments down below, learn a little bit from your fellow viewers, from your fellow subscribers. If you've gotten something that is inauthentic and you were able to diagnose it, what were the techniques that you used? What happened with that piece? I'd love to hear those stories too. Read through those comments. Let's kind of share this information with everybody and see if we can all learn a little bit more from this. I think this is a really important topic. If there are other videos or video series that you'd like to see me make, leave those questions, comments, or ideas down below, and I will be happy to see if I've got the knowledge and the examples. Maybe we can make a video or video series, and I'll give you a big shout out if we do. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click on that subscription button, hit the like button also, and share this video with other folks if you would. I'd love to see this get a broader group of folks looking at it and evaluating it. And again, those comments down below are going to be priceless. So make a comment, leave a comment, and read through the comments. And as always, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.